Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's ChemCareers webinar on working in energy. We're going to be focusing on mostly opportunities that are available for chemists. My name is Robert Bowles. I'm one of the careers advisors here at the Royal Society of Chemistry. We've got a great panelist today. I'm going to introduce them shortly. The way it's going to work today is if you do have any questions, what you can do is you can actually type them in while we're speaking, and then there'll be time at the end of it for us to go through those and answer any questions that you may have. So do please keep going through. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you today to our panel. It's a fantastic lineup we've got for you that's going to share their experience and insights into their careers within energy, and I hope it gives you some tips and some pointers for your own careers. Starting off, we've got Dr. Fawzi Abou-Chahine from Leighton Consulting here in London. Say hello, Fawzi.
Hi, everyone.
We've got Mike Jones.
Great to be here.
Who's a lab supervisor for Valero Energy Limited, a refinery down in South Wales. Hello, Mike.
Hello, everybody.
We've got Dr. Ben Langley, senior engineer at Oxford Photovoltaics. Hi, Ben.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And finally, we've got Lindsey Mooring, Fusion Innovations Section Leader from the UK Atomic Energy Agency. Say hello, Lindsey.
Afternoon, everyone. Afternoon, everyone.
Thanks for joining us today. This is really the plan and the structure for what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to start off really with all of our panelists going through, talking a little bit about their current roles, their career histories, how they've got to where they are today. Then really it's onto the stuff that's really kind of focused for the listeners out there. We're really going to be focusing on an overview of different roles for chemists working in all the different energy sectors. Maybe a little bit of crystal ball gazing, although that's quite hard to do at the moment. Maybe talk about some future opportunities that may be developing in the sector going forward. And then on to the kind of nuts and bolts, where and how you can look for those roles. And then we'll finish off really just with an overview of some of the networking opportunities that exist within the Royal Society of Chemistry, and also the support with your career that's also available from us. So I'm going to start off really handing over to our panelists. They're just going to talk for just a few minutes each about really their current roles and their current histories. So if I can start off with you, Fawzi, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're currently doing, and how you got there as well?
Sure. So I had a fairly standard chemistry education, really. Did undergraduate and masters at UCL, then a PhD at Bristol. Began to show interest in materials and the industry side of things. So did a postdoc in Finland on sort of solar cell materials. And then after a while, I realized actually I wanted to know more about how to commercialize science and the industry challenges. So now I'm an R&D tax consultant at Leighton. I help companies who've conducted R&D to receive a tax claim benefit. And what that entails is working with technical directors, but also non-technical specialists to understand what they do. And in terms of the energy sector, I've got an example here of a wind turbine. You might have coatings, you might have composites, you might have steel foundations. I'm not a chemical expert in any of them, but what I do have is an ability to understand technical concepts very broadly. So one of the key skills you develop in consulting is the communication angle, and that's something that chemists definitely have. The other two key skills I think consulting shows and develops is leadership and decision making, where you are getting a client to do what you want in a timescale you need, getting the right information, and also making decisions on the information they're sending through. Does it qualify? Does it meet your criteria? Which you don't quite get to do in academia. More than happy to talk about that later on. And if you want further information, you can either tweet me or the company.
Great, thanks very much, Fawzi. So on to you, Mike, then. Your career looks like it's been slightly different from Fawzi's.
Yeah, so when I came on to the panel first and saw that these guys all had their doctorates, it's very impressive. I took a different route than these guys and didn't spend so much time in academia. So I did science A levels at school here in West Wales, and then went on to BSc at the University of Cardiff, University of Wales, Cardiff, graduating in 2012 with a BSc. I went then to work for the National Laboratory Service, who were heavily involved in sort of green flag beach research and quality of the water in the local rivers and beaches. I did that for a few months. It was on a temporary contract. I was always looking at something else. And then I moved into the world of cargo inspection, which is basically quantity and quality analysis of the oil and gas movements. So there's an energy hub here in West Wales. At the time, there was 2 refineries, and there's an RWE power plant as well as gas terminals. So there's a lot of going on as far as shipping. It's one of the largest waterways in Europe and a very, very deep harbour, so has the benefit of taking in some of the larger ships that aren't able to berth elsewhere. I did that for 12 months. It was great, except you worked as the ships came in, so you didn't have a set rota. But what you did have is a lot of analysis of figures, quantitative, both quantitative, understanding numbers of and litres and gallons of products coming from ships to the shore and vice versa. And then you also had an introduction to the qualities of those fuels that we touched on. I moved then into the laboratory in Valero, where I work today, and worked through a number of different positions, starting as a laboratory technician, and I'll sort of touch on that a little bit more in a second, and then going on to specialise in the octane and cetane analysis, which is basically the quality of the spark ignition in both petrol and diesel fuels. I got to spend 12 or 18 months as an environmental specialist within environmental engineering. And again, it was a lot of data analysis and calculation and compliance reporting to the various regulatory bodies that the refinery has to report to from an emissions point of view. Very relevant as an ever-changing part of the world and an ever-changing part of this sector. And then went from there back to the lab, where I'm currently a lab supervisor. I threw up a couple of the bullet points on the right-hand side to say, why degree level chemistry? Why didn't I do a master's? And, what research versus production looked like? And degree level chemistry is I studied the sort of 4 sciences at school and didn't really know where to go. I thought strongly about veterinary, as we were brought up on a small holding, but did a 3-day course in vet linking Nottingham and quickly found out how stressful and underpaid vets are. And at the late stage did chemistry. I really enjoyed my time in Cardiff, but I didn't have the passion for the research that the other guys around me had. So I felt it would be best for me to get out into the working world and apply those key skills learned at a BSc and progress from there and learn on the job. What we've got here at Valero is we are a quality control laboratory, and we are production with some minor research. So if you drop onto the next slide, Rob, what does Valero Laboratory do? There's a couple of bullet points there, but just to finish up quickly, it's quality analysis basically of every stream that the refinery has, feed and product, hydrocarbon, gas, water streams. We have an involvement with final certification of all types of fuel for use in road, sea, air transport, as well as heating fuels and petrochems. And then we also provide analysis to our mechanical department and process engineering department for anything that they need with regards to corrosiveness of pipework and thinning of pipework and how the processes involved are performing. Essentially, we're here to produce qualified, verified and valid results to internal customers and then external customers who are purchasing our fuel. And there's a bit on the other side there about Valero Refinery. Opened in 1964, it's gone through a number of different companies owning it. It was expanded to increase a bigger gasoline demand. It's a very large refinery and ranked as one of the top and most complex refineries in Europe. And on this site, we've got 550 Valero employees and 400 long-term contractors who will work on behalf of Valero. Valero Laboratory itself, we've got 22 employees, 6 term contractors. So they'll work with us for a number of years before they're brought on to the Valero books. 15 of those guys work on a shift pattern, so the laboratory is manned 24/7, as is the rest of the refinery process unit. We've got 8-day support testing technicians, 2 quality technicians, 2 supervisors, 1 manager, and we've currently working in a very dated and a laboratory that's in need of an upgrade, and we've had an approval for a brand new laboratory which will be built next year. And then just to finish off, Valero globally its HQ is in San Antonio, which is in Texas. Valero worldwide has got 15 refineries, 14 ethanol plants, and 10,000 employees.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Mike. That gives you a real kind of sense of the scale of some of these operations. If we just move on then, Ben, you're up. Tell us about yourself.
Hi. Sure. So I started along the sort of traditional academic route. I did my undergraduate master's at Oxford, did a 4th-year research project in organic synthesis for solar cells, and I was going to follow the traditional route, I guess, where I'd start my DPhil with the same research group. However, my supervisor, who is Australian, or was Australian, I guess, came down one morning and said, sorry guys, I'm moving back to Australia to set up a new research group there. Does anyone want to come with me? So I then took him up on that opportunity, as things like that don't come along very often, and moved out to Brisbane to start the new research group with him. So I got to experience just exactly how you go about setting up a research group, from building the lab to setting up the bureaucratic infrastructure that goes with a research group, and I hadn't actually started my PhD at that point. I completed my PhD again in organic synthesis for this time dye-sensitized solar cells, and did a couple of years of postdoctoral research before various matters meant that I had to move back to the UK. And I actually found the advert in the back of the New Scientist one day when I was looking to move back, gave them a ring, and they said, come in for an interview when you're back in the UK. And then I joined Oxford Voltaics, who at that point it was only about 15 technical staff, from technicians to sort of a few department heads. And we were actually working in converted farm buildings on one of Oxford University's science parks, where spin-out companies, like incubator sites. And then at that point, it was very much like an academic lab. There was, you'd run an experiment all the way through, do the analysis, and we were successful enough that over the years we've expanded, and now we have the site in Oxford on the left and the site in Germany on the right, and we have over 100 people working for us across both sites. And it's changed from the sort of academic style research, and now it's very much looks more like industry. So with standard operating procedures, processes of record, everything is done, every step is done by one person rather than one person doing all steps. And so I've seen what it takes to make that transition between research coming out of a lab to almost going into production. Which we hope to do on our new tandem solar cell technology beginning of next year.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Ben. I wish you every luck with that. And then finally, Lindsey, you're working on a very different level by the looks of it. Talk to us about your career and what you do.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, I realise my career path might be a little bit different to everybody else. Started off similar, so I did a MChem in chemistry with management studies, and then was going down a more academic career in just general chemistry departments. But then I've subsequently moved into employment in all different types of companies, pretty much every type you can think of, from spin-out startups to the largest manufacturing employer in the country to a small UK subsidiary of a large Korean company, and I've now landed at a government authority. With all of that, I've worked in a range of sectors, and I've actually moved in and out of the energy sector multiple times, doing work in renewables, oil and gas, and now in fusion energy research. But from the beginning, it's always been a sort of technological applications of chemistry, and even in the academic side of things, it was very much industrial focused research that I was involved in. So involved in raising technology readiness levels of concepts through to products, and a lot of cross-sector research, and particularly working in cross-discipline teams. The career theme, if you had to pick one, is probably linking chemistry of materials in particular at varying length scales to bulk properties and industrial applications, which is why I think the transition to different sectors has been achievable, because it's a methodology that works across varying types of research, and it means that you can then link to very sector and use specific outcomes. I want to go to the next slide. So now my job title is development engineer, and I have to say I've been called engineer more often in my career than chemist or even scientist. That's a general job description for the type of remit that UKAEA need, in particular in the engineering realisation group that I sit within. I'm actually a fusion innovation section leader, which is more of the line managerial side of things, and my work really splits down into the left-hand side, the sort of management duties, but then with the technical leadership from my expertise. So if we look at the left-hand side, as I say, I'm a section leader in the engineering realisation group, which sits within central engineering, and the whole premise of our group is to bridge the engineering gap from proof of concept through industrial realisation to advanced fusion energy. And this is quite key at the moment, because fusion energy is transitioning away from fundamental research to how do we design and build viable fusion power plants. So this is where working within a multidisciplinary team is really important, because we've got a team of about 30 people, and we're all generally referred to as development engineers, but as this says, we're all just different flavours. So we've got chemistry, manufacturing expert, material scientists, physicists, and we all have the same goal, but we might approach it in a slightly different way. With this matrix management approach, I work on two main programs. One is the Joining and Advanced Manufacturing program for the fusion technology facilities, and that's where I started off as being the non-metallics technical lead, and then that's grown from me supplying non-metallics leadership and research into the new STEP program that you might have heard about, which is the UK program to create a viable fusion power plant on shorter timeframes. With that comes matrix management responsibilities, and this is things sort of picked up and developed throughout my career. It's directing research, it's coordinating external contracts, so that might have IP implications, that's funding, that's managing contracts. I'm involved in enhancing how we approach innovation to create mechanisms to facilitate innovative ideas so that we can work into a new phase of fusion research. And because of my industrial background, I'm also manufacturing discipline support to help overcome manufacturing challenges. And I do often find I have to convince people they need a chemist, only because I'm not sure it's a well understood discipline as we would like it to be. And then on the technical side, I just wanted to put up some examples of the areas of chemistry that I'm looking into at the moment. So nanofluids, to us, that would be a nanosol to increase heat transfer. Radiation hard polymers, so understanding the bonding that you could create in a polymeric network to survive a particular radiation environment. Joining of dissimilar materials, particularly non-metallics to metallics. And then composite structures sort of follows on from my aerospace research, but all of it is aimed at looking at and trying to understand alternative materials, including how we could then use them to manufacture viable fusion components. And then that opens up the design space for the engineers and how they can create new designs for fusion power plants.
That's great, Lindsey. Thanks very much. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the kind of matrix management that you talked about? I know that matrix management and managing across teams is something that kind of people talk a lot about. It's it's becoming more and more common within science and within sort of scientific organisations. Can you just tell us a little bit about what that involves and what your approach to it is, what your experience of it is?
Yeah, sure. So we're in the central engineering group, which is up to 200 plus people, and we're almost like a resource pool. So that the whole point of the matrix management is you can pull together a team that can be as effective as possible by leveraging the expertise within that team. So it means I might not be somebody's technical lead for something, but I might be their line manager for their general employment in the central engineering. So I can keep an eye on their overall career progress, what support they need, what training they'd like to do, what development they have, manage their workload with them to make sure that it is effective use of their time and that it is interesting and diverse for them. But I might not be the person with the technical direction of what they're doing. I would link in with those people, so I would get feedback from them and I would carry on that support. But it means that there is a distinction between somebody's day-to-day activities and their long-term management. So I've got people that I technically lead, but I don't do their appraisals, and there are people that I do their appraisals, but I don't technically manage.
Great stuff, Lindsey. Thanks very much for that. So hopefully you've everyone listening has had a really good overview of some of the roles that are available in that really wide range of energy sectors. I've tried to use people's career stories to explain and shed a bit of light on the different sort of sectors that are available. So that hopefully will give you some food for thought. I wanted to really start moving things on really to the discussions really. So really just starting really with, you've all had very different roles. You've all had different approaches to your careers. There are a really wide range of roles in the chemists within that sector. I'm just going to call on our panelists just to really go through either the roles that they've had or the roles that they've encountered, or just really within these areas. So really operations, generation and production. I'm going to lead with you, Mike. This is really just to get the people thinking that maybe have less experience within these sectors, just to really think about what sort of roles might be out there, what sort of job titles maybe to search for, what sort of level of background and experience might be expected for each role. Do you want to get the ball rolling, Mike, with your experience within that operations and production sort of area?
Yeah, sure. So I'll come at this from the angle of describing how our lab looks now, what range of experience that we've got in the current system, and if I get to the end of that and you want me to add a bit more, Rob, you prompt me on.
Yeah.
So as sort of touched already, we're a staff of 28, and that is a wide range of experience and ages. And you're talking, we've still got people here who are in their late 50s, early 60s. Some of these guys have been working at the refinery and in at the lab for 40 years. And we've got new starts and people in their 20s who've been here for 3 months. Out of that range of people, some are degree educated, some have come straight from school or A-levels or college, who obviously don't have a degree, and some people who have come straight out of other jobs that are linked to the industry. One example being a local cheese factory that they've worked there for a number of years and then come across, and it's that lab experience that really helps them come across. These guys are all under the bracket of laboratory technician. So you would start as a laboratory technician. And what we're trying to implement at the moment is a system whereby after a number of years, you would progress up to a senior laboratory technician. Perhaps then after a specialism, you'd lead to a lead technician. And then within the laboratory, you can look to specialize in an area and become that sort of technical specialist or an SME, a subject matter expert. Or would you progress to a supervision role where you'd be in charge of a number of people and the technical aspects associated. And of course, being a refinery with a huge number of departments that the laboratory works with, there are opportunities to progress outside of the laboratory into those roles, such as environmental engineering, who have always chosen to come to the lab because of the lab experience. You know, these guys that we've got at the lab now, some of them have got PhDs, some of them have got none, some have got BScs. They're not necessarily all in chemistry. What we've found over the years is chemistry degrees are very hard to come by in West Wales. It tends to be the people who have lived and were born or brought up in West Wales, gone away to do chemistry and then come back to work locally. I told myself when I'd had my chemistry degree that the two options for me in Pembrokeshire were teaching or they were industry. Both my parents were teachers, and towards the end of their teaching career, and their advice was don't go into teaching. So that's how I ended up in industry. Some of these guys are specialising in GC analysis, HPLC analysis, catalyst analysis. As I mentioned already, we've got some very specialised equipment in the form of engine and octane engines and cetane equipment, as well as your standard range of petrochemical and fuels testing. A lot of it for us is we can take, and we do look for BScs. You know, we would look like we look for degree level educated people. But as I said, we have taken people straight from school with science backgrounds, and it would be opportunity to develop yourself and train on the job as you go along, with a room to grow and develop into a specialist or a technical specialist role as time and your drive and the business needs sees fit.
Great stuff. Okay.
A lot of these guys. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, if it's okay, I'm going to move on a little bit, Mike. I think what's really clear from that is there are a really wide range of entry points. There's a really wide range of backgrounds kind of entering the market. Maybe we can kind of move on to speak a bit further on about kind of what you're really looking for. But thanks very much for that, Mike. So Ben, I'm going to start with you for the R&D side. I'm really keen to kind of learn a bit more about how you made that transition from that academic research mindset into kind of almost industrial applied, trying to develop product mindset. You know, and as you've kind of seen the organisation that you currently work for grow, how's that growth affected and impacted on the type of people that the organisation has been looking to recruit?
Sure. So as I mentioned in my introduction, I'm an organic chemist, but ironically, I haven't done a single chemical synthesis since I stopped being an academic. So what happened when I joined, because it was a small startup, what we were looking for was PhD level academics in areas related to it. So we had people who had done silicon solar cells, with people who'd done OPV, but they were PhD level. So they were used to what it takes to run a research project, as it were, because we had to both come up with the ideas and then operate the machinery and get the results and analyze the results and then present those results to our board. Very much at that point, it was very much as if we were just presenting at a conference or something like that. And then as the company expands, it's really a sort of division of labor thing. So your role becomes more focused on one particular area. So for example, now I am lead on our active layer deposition technologies, and these are wet chemistry. They are like vacuum depositions and things like that for our the active layer in our solar cells. And going back to what Lindsey was saying a minute ago, I'm also one of the only chemists in the company, and so it's surprisingly rare that chemists seem to come into the energy sector. It's dominated a lot by physicists in my experience, and they tend to have funny ideas about chemistry. So as the company grew, we started hiring technicians, and then so that the engineers, we're called engineers. I'm not an engineer, I'm a chemist, but that's a management decision. My wife hates it, she's really an engineer. So the processes would then be run by technicians, and these were people who had degrees. Not always, often we hired people who didn't have degrees, but they had experience in working to a defined process. And I think that's one of the key things for us, is you need to have experience, for at least the technicians, you need to have experience or understanding of what it means to work to a standard operating procedure or process. It's essential that when you ask for the same thing to be done more than once, the same thing gets done more than once and to the specification. As for the engineering level, we still hire across the whole range of sort of energy research, from silicon to even sort of more photophysics and things like that. So it's more of the mindset rather than the actual relevant experience we hire for. If you can, if you're used to doing research and have experience of getting results and, you know, following a logical train of thought, that's more useful to us than have you worked in exactly the field that we're researching. And so yeah, carry on.
No, thanks, Ben. I was going to say that's a really good point. That kind of, we see this a lot with people that kind of particularly come from an academic or PhD background, that actually, you know, that they quite often look for a role, they limit their job search to a role that is directly relevant to their PhD or academic research. Sure. And unless you happen to be very lucky and stumble onto quite a niche area sometimes, actually being able to expand your horizons beyond that and think a bit broader about what you bring can be really useful. Was there anything else that you quickly wanted to add, Ben, or are you okay if I move on?
No, I'm okay if you move on.
Sorry to interrupt. Okay, and Lindsey, what are your thoughts, and what else can you think of to add to kind of what we've covered already?
I think what Ben was just discussing about the mindset is what people hire on is particularly true in the area of fusion that I'm in, because the chances of anybody with any discipline having the experience in fusion research is so small. It's, you know, unless you've worked on a different fusion lab somewhere in the world, you're not going to have that experience. So we hire on mindset and approach, which is a discipline agnostic way of doing it, rather than does the candidate have this particular experience. And going back to the idea of search terms, definitely broadening job titles that people look for. I mean, I've been called section leader twice. I've been called scientist, engineer, chemist, R&D chemist, technical and service chemist. So it's keeping an open mind and maybe looking on what they're looking for rather than the titles, I think, is key to successful applications.
Great stuff, Lindsey. And so with that mindset and approach that you look for, how do you actually assess for that, and how do you actually know it when you see it during the application process?
So we actually structure like our interview type questions to be more broader than tell us about this particular bit of chemistry. So it would be something like, tell us about a project where you have taken it in a new direction because of how you've approached it particularly. So it's very much focused on how that person, how that candidate has thought through what was asked of them and where they have identified it, where it could go, as well as asking them general questions, let's say about fusion, just to understand if they can think through the logic of it. So it's not necessarily that you have to get it right, but just how you explain how you've got there, a bit like with a Viva would be. Mm-hmm. It's a discussion and just to understand how somebody thinks.
Yeah. So someone once said to me, it's not about what you know, it's how you think. And I think that's,
how you communicate what you're thinking as well, so that we can understand where you're coming from.
Great stuff. And that leads us really nicely on to Fawzi, actually. You talked earlier on about, you know, communicating is really important in your role. Do you just want to talk us about a little bit about, you know, what skills you use, how you approach that. You obviously have a lot of contact with clients. How do you approach that? How do you actually go about being a really effective consultant? Fawzi, you still there? Oh. Fawzi, how's that?
Yes.
Is that better?
Yes, minor connection issues. Yes,
Okay.
no, I think I'd like to emphasize what Ben and Lindsey said, actually, that one of the failings that I often find colleagues and scientists generally, that they focus too much about what they can specifically do, when actually their transferable skills are what they are really adding value to the company or project they're working on. So so that's why I mentioned communication. It's not just I can communicate about spectroscopy or how materials function, which is what my PhD and postdoc were about. It's actually about broader scientific concepts and not just explaining to a customer at a technical level, but also a non-technical level, and also understanding the very broad science. So it's how you add value from the skills that you have developed, rather than the specific technical knowledge. And likewise, if you are handling lots of reactions, lots of projects at the same time in the lab, well, that's great experience, because that means you can project manage, you can manage your time, you can prioritize different projects, and that's where the value add to your future manager, future organization is. So try not to think about what you've specifically achieved, which can be important, but more how your future employer can benefit from the experience you bring.
Great stuff. Okay, I'm just going to move on now. So this might be a bit of a tricky question to be asking, particularly at the moment. So obviously a lot of people that are kind of on the call today are kind of interested in maybe moving into kind of energy sectors in the future. They might be thinking about maybe making a career change, maybe establishing their career early on, rather than maybe making this about, you know, what sort of roles might be available in the future. That maybe you may have some views on that. Maybe if we can also think about how you see the areas that you're in developing, where the opportunity for growth and expanding employment might exist. Mike, can we have a quick few words from yours? You're obviously in a very well established industry and a very well established sector. Can you see what you've obviously just, you know, your organisation's just investing in a brand new lab for you, so obviously they see a potential and a future there. Can you just tell us a bit more about what you think might be developing in the future for you guys?
Yeah, sure. So Valero as a whole, as I said earlier, it's got a number of ethanol plants. And for those of you who aren't aware, ethanol is used as a blending agent into gasoline or petrol. So a lot of the UK petrol will have 5% ethanol in to your EN228 spec, which is your green pump next time you go and put some petrol in your car. And it's the same way for the green diesel. Valero in the US owns Diamond Green Diesel, which is all about renewable diesel sources and buying in used cooking oil or vegetable oil and then refining that to make green diesel. The way that the regulatory and government compliance is going, the regulations and legislation is obviously aiming for a cleaner and a more green environment than at the moment. So as regulations change and force the industry to change, which it is very slowly, there will be the use of more vegetable oils, recycled vegetable oils, more ethanols put into gasolines, more renewable fuels. There's also talk about using hydrogen either as fuel cells or hydrogen on the heating systems of UK homes. And there's a couple of different ways you can make hydrogen, and some of it can be captured. And as we do now from hydrocarbon processing, and that would be an established way already without having to change much of the grid and much of the makeup that's certainly something that the refining industry could look at. It's all going to have to change for people to stay solvent and to stay relevant. And I think in Europe, especially some of the Scandinavian companies, have already looked at changing how their refineries work, changing refinery units to process things like recycled plastics, to process petrochemicals. So I think as an industry, that's the way it's going to go. I think it's going to go slowly, and I think that's the way it will have to go for oil refiners to stay relevant and to stay in business.
Great stuff. Thanks very much for that, Mike. What about you, Ben? You see a bright future within sort of solar cells and photovoltaics. Do you want to just expand a bit on your thoughts in that area?
Sure. In terms of photovoltaics, we're in the sort of situation where I think silicon single junction silicon solar cells are about 90% of the market, and because of various market forces in the late 2000s, it's cheap, and the alternative technologies in solar generation end up competing. If they're just going to go single junction, they end up competing in that last 10% of the market. So there are something like 5 or 6 different solar cell architectures that are competing for that last 10%. So Oxford PV took the view that if you can't beat them, join them, which is why our first product coming out is actually a perovskite on silicon tandem, so that we, instead of competing with that silicon, we we sell to the silicon cell manufacturers is the concept. So the growth areas, I think, are going to be in if you can make silicon better as some sort of tandem or something like that. There are challenges with that, but that's the only real way that you can get into the market at the moment, I think.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. And Fawzi, you obviously work with a wide range of clients in a wide range of industries. Where do you see your opportunities for growth going forward?
Well, there's a huge range of government funding opportunities that's coming up very soon in light of COVID, just to get businesses going. So there's going to be an actual increase in demand for my company services and consultancy services generally. And there will always be a need for bright people who understand complicated government guidelines, legislation to deliver services for clients who either don't know how to do it, don't have the time, don't want to do it, want someone who knows what they're doing. There's always going to be a need, and there's always going to be a growth for financial services like that.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Lindsey. Thanks very much, Fawzi. So, Lindsey, on to you. Are we going to see a time when we're all going to have a portable fusion reactor on the roof of our car to send us back and travel through time, or is that still a little way off at the moment?
We're certainly in a phase where fusion energy is moving away from fundamental research to viable power plants, and how fusion energy is going to be part of the future energy portfolio mix. Regarding transport, we might have a few things we're looking at regarding fusion powered spacecraft, but that's a whole other discussion point.
Discussion. Fantastic.
But I would just say that collectively around the world, we've got ITER being built in the south of France in Cadarache at the moment, which is a large endeavour for many countries in the world. And beyond that, so that's still an experimental reactor, and beyond that there are varying plans around the world in different countries, including the European one, to build a demonstrator power plant. And then we also have the UK's focused programmes about research, moving away from research to investable designs and power plants. And I would say that this change of tack is a key time for other disciplines such as chemists to join and support what they need, because historically, especially in the UK, there's been a lot of focus on employment for plasma physicists and engineers to build and run experiments, and that is changing.
Okay, Fantastic. That's good news. Right. We are moving on. I'm going to spend a little bit of time really just thinking about where to look for roles in different areas. Maybe start off. We've covered quite a lot of this actually around what kind of employers are looking for. I mean, hopefully you've got some really good insight into the type of skills that recruiters are looking for within this sector. So, you know, it is a very broad mix of skills. You know, don't limit yourself by what you've done in the past. You know, think about how you can apply your skills, your expertise to the particular organisation that you're looking for. We do have a list of websites I'm going to bring up in a moment. Networking is another thing that we're going to briefly mention as well. So this is just a few different energy and environmental websites that I've come across. There's some that are sector specific. There's some things like the UK Atomic Agency and the nuclear graduates. They have specific graduate schemes. There's sector job sites for green jobs, for environmental, for oil and gas. So, you know, quite often you're putting jobs, you know, looking for job sites. You'll hit the big ones very quickly. But actually, if you dig a little bit deeper, there are a wide range of real kind of industry-specific job websites that can really help you in your job search as well. I'm going to move on a little bit now to Fawzi as well. So one of the things that came about earlier, Ben obviously highlighted the importance of finding a mentor, someone that can kind of take them with you. So the personal contacts where you're looking for jobs can be very important. There are a lot of opportunities for kind of building your professional networks within the Royal Society of Chemistry. So I'm just going to ask Fawzi just to talk a little bit about the energy sector interest group, which is one of around about 80 interest groups within the RSC. This is a really good way for you to kind of network within this particular sector. I'm going to stop now before I say everything that Fawzi's about to say. Fawzi, just want to tell us a little bit more about the interest group that you and Lindsey are both part of.
Sure. So the energy sector interest group has a mission to support the professional interests of the roughly 1,200 members they have, all part of the RSC, and provide a forum to access knowledge and express views relating to energy. We organise events around networking, such as in solar PV, nuclear chemistry. We've recently just awarded a PhD thesis award. I think this is the 7th year in a row that we've done that. And in terms of the reason I personally joined was to develop further leadership skills, because you get to, for example, as part of the PhD award, you have to lead a subgroup to make a decision about who's going to win that award. So there's a range of opportunities to network, but also develop skills and raise your profile within the energy sector.
Great stuff. So, you know, if you are interested in this area, do check it out. I think as our RSC member, you can join, I think, 2 or 3 different interest groups for no extra charge. I'm just going to really finish off just with a quick overview of the support that's available from the Royal Society of Chemistry. We have had some questions, so I'm going to ask those after this as well. Thanks very much for listening today. Hopefully you're interested in kind of developing your careers either in this or other areas. Do check out the Royal Society of Chemistry's career website. We can offer kind of one-to-one career support for our managers as well. There's lots of ways you can get involved, so do take a look at that. I'm going to really kind of open it up to the questions now. We've had lots of questions. Thanks very much for taking the time to type those in. We've had one around transitioning from academia to industry. I think we covered some of that earlier. It's really kind of about making sure that you can show the relevance of your skills to your employer. So they are around things like project management skills, how you approach kind of questions and add value to the organisation you want to be looking at. So this is maybe one for either Ben or Lindsey maybe. If you're doing a PhD, does it need to be related to energy or materials to be able to get a job in this sector? Maybe if you kind of limit it to your particular organisations. That's from Olivia. Any thoughts from you, Lindsey or Ben?
I would certainly say it doesn't have to be exactly the area of research. As I said earlier, the chances of someone doing a project in a specific area that we would need is so small that we actually keep it quite broad.
And what about you, Ben?
It's not quite PhD, but we do actually have one of our technicians has a degree in archaeology. So that's, again, it's about the mindset. One of the things I wanted to add was, like, if you're used to doing something technical, so you're used to the ideas behind setting up an experiment. And one of the things that was really useful for me is that I'd been equipment lead on some of the equipment we had in our research lab, so I knew what it meant to keep a piece of equipment, analytical equipment running, or a couple of pieces of analytical equipment running. Actually, that was been incredibly useful. So yeah, I don't think it does have to be. It helps certainly because you're familiar with some of the areas of research and you've come across topics or something like that before. I mean, if you can demonstrate that you're able to learn for the interview, then I'm sure that they would consider you.
Great stuff. And also, this is another question for you, actually, Ben. This is from Rachel. She's just wondering why you chose to join a small startup to begin with, and why you stayed in that role as it grew.
Actually, it was just serendipity. Like, I saw the advert in the back of the New Scientist, and I was looking to move into industry. I knew about the research. It was a spin-out company, and I knew about the research of Henry Snaith, the founder of the company, through conferences and papers and things that I'd read in the area. And yeah, I actually got an introduction to Henry Snaith through my supervisor. So ironically, what happened was that his research was making the research for my PhD outdated. So I finished my PhD just in time before it became irrelevant.
Fantastic. So, yeah, that's a good point about small companies and startups. They can quite often be really good opportunities to grow, particularly early on in your career. They don't always have a very good visibility, so they are worth looking at. So go, for example, around local science parks, local innovation parks, get a feel for what organisations are out there that you might want to join. We've had a question.
I was just going to say, the nice thing about startups is they are so close to the academic lab experience because they're so small.
Yeah, I'd agree. I've worked for a couple of that, and I'd also add, you do get exposed to quite a wide range of skills very quickly. Quite often the role isn't always very well defined quite early on. You are doing research, but you can quite often be involved in kind of talking with customers and do marketing and things like that as well. So it can be a good way to try lots of different things early on in your career. Someone's had a question about employment from non-British or non-EU persons. I suspect that's going to depend on the organisation that you want to join, what their policy is, whether they have, whether they're registered with their Home Office to kind of apply for a visa. I think you need to have that discussion with the company you're looking to join and think about the value that you add to them. So we've had a question here about summer placements. This may be a bit moot for 2020, but maybe looking towards the future of 2021, do either of your organisations offer summer placements? Have any of you been on summer placements yourselves? Anyone want to take that one at all?
I'll take that one. I got a summer placement a few years ago for a science-based charity. My job was to go through newspaper reportings of scientific topics and how media weren't representing science effectively. I think it's not a bad idea to reach out to companies that you think would be worth seeking a summer placement. You might not be able to do much on site, but there may be opportunities to work from home. And nevertheless, even if you can't, you've shown interest, and that's definitely going to win you brownie points with their HR team. You've demonstrated yourself as someone switched on and keen to engage. So there's no harm in trying.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of organisations at the moment, you know, they are finding different ways of working. It could actually be that this maybe the current situation does offer some opportunities that maybe weren't around. You can maybe kind of interact with organisations that are maybe geographically distant from where you are, maybe on a level that you've not been able to do. Just one final question.
I know we certainly
Yep.
take
Sorry, Lindsey.
placements.
Yep,
I
carry
think
on,
you can
Lindsey.
find a link on the website.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I'm just going to ask a final question. Really, this is maybe for one from Mike and maybe for Lindsey as well. But Ben might have a view on it as well. This is from Nat Rodriguez. They're saying about the level of seniority that you'd expect a PhD. Oh. Okay, not sure where that came from. So they're after the level of seniority a PhD holder might apply to, entry level or higher up. I think they're looking at really kind of, what sort of jobs maybe might a PhD go for? Any view on that? Anyone at all?
So for at UKAEA, it wouldn't be entry level because our entry level goes all the way down to graduate scheme. So that would be probably more about a level 3, I would say. So I think somebody with a PhD would be at a higher level than that. We would expect people to take on some ownership and some leadership aspects to it, because we also take people from apprentice scheme level as well for the engineers. So certainly with a PhD, you would come in not at entry level.
Yeah, and that is something that can happen across different organisations as well. Sometimes the PhD doesn't necessarily mean that you enter in at a higher level, but it can lead to kind of faster career progression further down the line as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap up the questions there. Thanks very much, all of you that asked one. I'm just going to ask this one. Actually, we've got a couple more that just come in because they're quite interesting. Anyone got any views on how hiring process have been affected by COVID-19? Very timely. I would just say I think those that are still hiring are still going through the process. I think there's obviously much more video interviews than before, but actually a lot of organisations are already starting to use video interviews more anyway. I think that process has accelerated. Do any other panelists, are they currently hiring at the moment? Are you finding that being affected by COVID-19 at all?
So we're carrying
From our point
on.
of view, sorry, Lindsey, you carry on. You carry
Okay, Lindsey, can you take that one?
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear what was going on there.
Yeah.
So we're certainly carrying on using remote facilities to carry on with permanent position hiring and grad scheme and all the other types. So it doesn't seem to have paused. The only thing that it might do is delay start dates only because of setting up people on remote systems.
Great stuff.
But we're talking weeks, not months.
Yeah. Fantastic.
just to add to that.
Yeah, go for it, Mike.
Not from a laboratory point of view because we're fully stocked at the moment, but from the rest of site, a process engineering, chemical engineering point of view, exactly as Lindsey said, they've carried on recruiting. They've taken on 3 or 4 new extra engineers. They run a graduate scheme and a placement program for chemical engineers here at the refinery, and that's continued. It just means the people starting a job will start it from home. And carry on working from home at the moment until we all come back onto site. So a lot of the summer placements are going to be from their living room or their bedroom rather than on site looking in a column or whatever else.
Great stuff. And I've just got one final question because it's breaking up a bit. This is a question from Emma. She's a graduate. Can all the panelists just check your audio at the moment? There's a lot of background noise coming in from somewhere. So this is a question from Emma, graduate with a background in forensic science, but 70% kind of analytical degree, struggling to get the foot in the door. She says that the drawback is a lack of experience outside of university. Those of you that do kind of recruit fresh graduates, how would you suggest she kind of approach applications to kind of help with that situation?
From us, Rob, we've actually got 2 forensic chemists with us, so with her exact degree. I think as the guys have touched on already, you know, the chemistry gives you a wealth of skills, you know, analytical minded, and as they said earlier, you know, it's how you think, not what you know.
Yeah.
And what I was going to touch on from earlier is that we are talking about the process that we would like from them, but I know that the biggest hurdle for a lot of people is getting through the interview. And what tends people to do is they learn about the company and they've got themselves the set answers and they just regurgitate everything they've learned rather than they think on their feet. And I think that's one of the biggest skills that they need to apply in interviews, especially for chemists, lab work and all the experience they've gained in lab work over those 3 years. If you're looking to come into a lab setting where you're going to be a lab technician, you really need to push hard that in your CV and your cover letter of all of the good techniques you've covered, include what equipment you've used and the safety regulations and aspects you've been subject to. And they're the sort of things that you want to bring to your interview. And the same as Lindsey talked earlier about interviews, is being able to listen to the question and then assess it and respond the right way and talk about a scenario and a bigger picture rather than just regurgitating things you might have Googled or you might have found online about that company.
Great stuff. Well, that seems a really good place to finish. Thanks everyone for your time today. Thanks everyone for listening. If anyone does still have any questions, I've tried to get through as many as I can. Apologies if I've not been able to read yours out. If you do have any further questions, if you do need any further help with your career or your job hunting, if you are an RSC member, do please get in touch with me. I've got my contact details up there on the screen. I'm just going to finally just say to everyone, thanks to all the panelists for taking part. Thanks for giving up your time today. And yeah, good luck all of you with your career and job hunts. And it's been a really interesting insight into the really wide range of careers that are available within the energy sector. Thanks very much for taking part.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.